Is theology a science? Can you even talk about science and theology in the same breath? Because today, we've got somebody who honestly thinks they can, and they're so laughably wrong that it's hard to take any of it at all seriously. But we'll try, right? No, we're not going to do that at all. We're just going to point out how dumb it all is, because that's really what we do. Today, we're going to go take a look at a video from the Thomistic Institute and Father Thomas Joseph White. I'm going to be really honest up front. This was a really hard video to even get through because there's only so much bullshit that you can handle in one sitting, and this one put me way over my limit. Yet, this is exactly why the religious get absolutely nowhere, because it's just a long string of indemonstrable bunk backed up with nothing but blind faith and wishful thinking. So let's try to get through this, because trust me, it's not going to be easy.
Why should we study theology? Does it really give us objective knowledge about the world?
No, it doesn't. It does give you a really terrible fashion sense, though, but, just a little hint. Stop wearing a sheet.
And what does it mean to call theology a science?
It means that you're delusional. So let's get some things out of the way up front. Science is, by definition, the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. As such, theology can't be a science because it doesn't address the natural world, nor does it rely on observation or experimentation. It's all fee-fees and faith, nothing rational. Now, I'm trying not to get in his way too much, but I figure we really need to know what these words mean up front before he invariably grabs the goalposts and makes a run for it. When he does that, which we all know he's going to, I figure we might need a reminder of what he's doing wrong.
Aquinas asks this question, actually tries to define more generally what is a science, and he takes there a philosophical definition from Aristotle first. Science is basically just an organized body of knowledge developed to understand a given subject.
Which isn't what science is. We've already been there. This is why it's so hard to talk to the religious, because they've got their own terminology for everything, and that terminology doesn't agree with the commonly used word. It's really hard to nail them down on the words that they use, because they're never using words in a recognizable way. They tend to be very vague and variable, mostly a moving target because they back themselves into a corner and then they just change gears and make a run for it so they can get out again. If this was an actual discussion, I would never, ever let that definition go. But here I don't have a whole lot of a choice, so let's just continue.
So you take biology. Biologists study living things. They develop a science of living organisms. Ethicists study human moral activity. They develop a science of ethics.
Except that's not a science, is it? That's philosophy. This is why it's important to use words properly and consistently. Under his definition, and I know why he's doing it, you can call absolutely anything a science. You can have the science of Star Trek. You can have the science of Bigfoot. And of course, he's trying to get to the science of religion because the word science carries intellectual weight, whereas theology simply doesn't. But we're not going to let him get away with that, are we?
Metaphysicians study everything that exists insofar as it exists, and that's what we call the science of being. Those are all subjects of natural reason.
Yeah, About that, most of metaphysics isn't about things that can be demonstrated to exist. They're about concepts, things in your head, not things that are actually so in demonstrable reality, and this is where the religious get into trouble. They are desperate to be seen on the same level of science without actually operating on the same level as science. Yes, that's going to piss off a lot of philosophy fanboys, but too bad. This isn't remotely uncommon in philosophical circles. Rudolf Carnap, for instance, wrote the paper The Elimination of Metaphysics Through Logical Analysis of Language, where he concluded that the statements of metaphysics are entirely meaningless and serve for the expression of the general attitude of the person toward life, but being a substitute, albeit an inadequate one, for art. Through the form of its works, it pretends to be something that it is not. I find most of metaphysics, especially where applicable in religion, to be a complete waste of time. You might disagree and we could have a discussion on that, but just throwing out metaphysics, that's not going to get you anywhere.
So it's a kind of a general definition of science. So Aquinas also then asks, can we consider Christian theology as science as well? And if so, in what sense? And he's talking about the study of divine revelation, the mystery of God revealed in Christ.
And how can you rationally study that? It's all just stories told in a big book of mythology. That's like asking if you can study the existence of unicorns. How exactly could you do that without any unicorns to actually look at? It's why history isn't a science. It's why there are hard sciences and soft sciences. The latter aren't really sciences at all because there's nothing testable to examine or predictions to be made which can be verified in the future. Religion is all about feeling good. It's not at all about being factually correct. That's what science requires, at least in my opinion.
Now, actually, his answer to this question is nuanced. Aquinas does affirm that theology, properly speaking, is a science. It's a study of the inner intelligibility of the mystery of God revealed in Christ through the church.
And how is any of that rationally intelligible? That's an honest question. Everything in religion is based on faith, not fact. It's about what people want to be true, not what can be demonstrated to be true. And that's why philosophy isn't a science either. Go try talking to moral realists about their evidence, and they'll be standing there like deer in the headlights. They want the credibility of science without doing the work of science. And it's kind of funny how that works, isn't it?
But he also notes that it differs significantly from other sciences primarily because theology's principles, or starting points, are not derived from evidential knowledge, from things we ordinarily experience or our own natural knowledge of the world. Instead, theology's first principles are given vertically, as it were, in divine revelation by God.
See? What'd I tell you? You don't get to start off with a definition of science like I provided at the beginning of this video and then just say, well, I don't want to do any of that, but I'm still going to call it science because I want the benefits without limiting me in any way. That's not how it works. Science is what science is, and you don't get to be a science if you can't demonstrate that anything that you're working with is real. Where is this God, and how can you demonstrate it? How can you show that this supposed revelation by God actually exists, and it isn't just a figment of your overactive imagination? How can you prove anything? These are questions that we need answers to, and they are things that the religious can't remotely address, at least in any rational, critical, or evidential manner. This is all just wishful thinking. So, hard pass.
How do we know, for example, that Christ is both God and human, or that God actually became human? Well, we know those things by the grace of faith. It's a supernatural gift to enlighten the mind, and it gives us first starting points.
How do we know that the Loch Ness Monster exists? Well, we just have faith, and there's lots of people who will tell you stories about seeing things in the loch. But that's not science, that's fantasy. I don't give a damn what you believe. I care what you can demonstrate is actually so, and if you can't demonstrate anything at all, then what you have isn't science, it's delusion. It's something you really ought to be embarrassed by.
And likewise, we know that God is the mystery of the Holy Trinity by the grace of faith. So the core truths of Christianity are known and they're certain, but they're not known by natural demonstration or philosophical argument, but by a deeper form of insight provided by the grace of the Holy Spirit.
Says who? Because can't anybody do that? I mean, every single religion out there says the exact same thing. They're right because they have some kind of special insight provided by their imaginary friends that they can't show are actually real, but why should anybody take any of that seriously because they really want it to be true? Again, this is something that you can replicate by just making things up. I know that pineapple on pizzas is a sin against nature because invisible, intangible, universe creating pixies told me so. Now, I can't prove it, but I have absolute faith that it's true. And you can't prove me wrong, right?
And actually, that's part of the point. Divine revelation is meant to take us beyond or above our merely human range of knowing, so as to introduce us into friendship and intellectual familiarity with God. By faith and hope and charity, the human being begins to participate in the very knowledge of God and of the saints.
You mean that thing you can't prove is real. So let's go right back to the definition of science, which, to remind everybody, is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Now show that the religious science that he's talking about can do any of those things. It can't. But he doesn't care because he's on a roll. But that's not how science works. That's how delusion works. And I'm sorry, but delusion isn't anything that you ought to be proud of.
Staying only within our limited range of natural understanding, then, would mean excluding ourselves from the opportunity to know more about God than we could know by our own mere human powers.
Thus, not having any claim at all on the label of science because that's exactly what it requires. I mean, there's something seriously wrong with this guy because he really wishes that he was a scientist of sorts, but he's not exercising any of the mechanisms or methodologies of science to even get within spitting distance of what science is. That's why he's got so many issues here, because he doesn't actually know what the hell he's talking about. He's just got an overactive fantasy life and an ego that just won't quit. And I'm sorry, but I'm just not interested in your delusions. Try to grow the hell up.
So, it is a science, but it's a science made possible by grace. That's an interesting qualification, and it's rather significant. God gives you the grace to embark on an intelligent study of God's own mystery.
But that's not what science is. Remember, we're talking about a systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Anything else isn't science. This is why religions are so good at playing definition bingo. Words mean what they want them to mean in the moment, and if it becomes inconvenient in 10 seconds, well, that's just not what the word means anymore. Is it any wonder I'm so utterly unimpressed with religion, given that this is how so many theists treat it? Nowhere in any rational definition of science is, because I like it, what the word means. Yet that seems to be exactly what tons of theists would like it to be, and that's not reality.
Secondly, Aquinas notes that the truths of revelation given us to study are compatible with the truths of all other forms of knowledge or the sciences we acquire naturally.
Not even remotely close. Now, I'm sure he'll try to rationalize that in a second, even though rationalization is, well, irrational, But no matter what he does, I can't see how it will even be remotely defensible in any way, shape, or form. Revelation is not a credible way to find out anything about the world, especially revelation from something you can't even prove is real in the first place. That's the problem. If you said you got revelation from, say, that guy over there, at least you could prove that guy over there is real. And you can probably even just go over there and ask him if what he said was actually valid. Now, how do you do that with an imaginary man in the sky? Because the one thing that science doesn't use, and this goes for all science, hard and soft, but none of them rely on faith. In fact, faith is antithetical to science. You don't get to rely on faith because faith is not demonstrable and science requires it. So Father White here is out of his ever-loving mind. And I really don't think that's much of a surprise.
So the truths of revelation are not contrary to natural reason ever. The things that God reveals are above nature. That's why we call them supernatural, because super comes from the Greek for above. But there's no substitute for faith, as if you could just depend only on natural knowledge. You need this higher knowledge.
And that's just an empty claim. Now, I've said this before, but the word supernatural is just a placeholder for their own ignorance. They have no clue what this supernatural actually is. It's just gotta be there because, God. Why? Because they have no other means to demonstrate anything about God. Claims about God fail miserably when put to any kind of rational test. Therefore, they just invalidate all rational tests by moving God beyond any coherent evaluation. Again, that's not science because science requires something to study, and they are just arbitrarily making up an entirely imaginary realm into which they stick their imaginary deity. And that's not how any of this works.
And God affords us certain helps to see that revelation is rational to believe in. So, for example, we can study the mysteries in their internal coherence and see the integrity of revelation. We can examine how the mysteries illuminate the human condition and how the truth of Christianity casts light on ordinary human experience. We can prove some things available to reason that dovetail with revelation, like proving the existence of God by philosophical argument, which is also a revealed truth. And finally, God gives confirming signs, which the church traditionally calls reasons of credibility, such as miracles, to manifest the truth of revelation.
And all of that, every single bit of it, is complete bullshit. Absolutely none of that is demonstrable or defensible. It's all just empty claims that have no means whatsoever to be verified or validated objectively. It puts you back into the overactive religious imagination, as every single one of those examples shows. So let's go through them one by one. He refers to mysteries. Now, there's a line by George Carlin about that, but I think this bit is a whole lot better.
But in the bullshit department, a businessman can't hold a candle to a clergyman. Because I got to tell you the truth, folks. I got to tell you the truth. When it comes to bullshit, big time, major league bullshit, you have to stand in awe of the all-time champion of false promises and exaggerated claims, religion. No contest. No contest. Religion easily has the greatest bullshit story ever told. Think about it. Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky, who watches everything you do every minute of every day. And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish, where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you. He loves you.
Anyhow, there's no science to mysteries. They're mysteries. They have no explanations, at least at the moment. That's kind of the point. This is just bullshit that Catholics believe for no good reasons. Well, fuck the Catholics. It's better than letting them rape little kids, I guess, but yeah, fuck them all. So the whole mysteries bit, that's completely out. Then he talks about illuminating the human condition. But that's all in his head. Things you can't demonstrate are real can't illuminate anything. This is just stupid. Next comes philosophical arguments, which we've already completely debunked around here. Just because it sounds good to you, that doesn't make any of it real. See any of the couple dozen videos I've done on that. Just because gullible idiots buy into it, that doesn't make it so. And finally, he says that there are miracles. Really? Prove it. Because sticking a label on something, that doesn't make it real. By definition, you can't explain a miracle. If you could explain a miracle, then that means it's not a miracle anymore, doesn't it? It's just something you can't understand. That doesn't mean that God done it, though, which is what they really want. So all of this is just stupid. Of course, you'd never get the idiot in the robe to admit it, so he's just going to keep on going.
So faith in the end depends on testimony. God speaks, he reveals himself, and we create a science around the truth of that revelation and look at its intelligibility, but it's compatible with reason, and we have signs that it's actually rational to engage with the revelation.
And none of that gobbledygook is actually true. He's just throwing out a word salad as a means to engage with people who already believe, and it doesn't matter if any of it makes any sense because he doesn't look at the world as a rational person. That's kind of the problem. None of these religious retards are rational. They just really want it to be true. And none of them actually care if it is. And worse, they don't actually consider what it would take to verify any of these fanciful stories because they don't care about verification. So long as they get that warm fuzzy inside, that's all that matters. Except it's not. Warm fuzzies don't mean anything to rational people. And that's why when we go back and look at the very definition of being rational, we find the following. Rational decisions and thoughts are based on reason rather than emotion. And that's part of the definition. The religious might be lying to themselves and trying to shove their goalposts out into rationality, but they aren't actually interested in being rational. They're just being overly emotional imbeciles. You know, just like this guy.
The center of this science is the knowledge of the Holy Trinity.
Oh, really? And how did this leave the realm of faith and enter the realm of knowledge again? Because you don't seem to know what these words actually mean. Just because you claim a thing is knowledge, that doesn't mean it's actual knowledge. Someone can't rationally claim to have knowledge of Bigfoot because there's no evidence that Bigfoot is real. Just because you want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. This is another place where they're just playing musical definitions because they have absolutely no means whatsoever of coming to actual rational positions based on evidence. They just want to believe.
If we really want to understand the mystery of revelation, we have to understand who God is.
And how do you propose to do that? Because this is insanely common among the religious. They will say that God's a mystery, but they're certainly happy to tell you absolutely everything about what God wants, how God thinks, and what you have to do to keep God from kicking your ass. Well, how the hell do you know any of that? Well, it's because they just made it up, or they're listening to people who just made it up, because there's no way to objectively demonstrate that you actually know what the hell you're talking about. As I'm writing this, there was yet another theist over on my channel who started talking about personal revelation and religious experiences. He had first-hand knowledge of God. Well, how the hell do you know that? You claim that you have first-hand knowledge of God, but why should I believe you? And if I'm not supposed to believe you, if this is just something that you made up in your head to make yourself feel good, why'd you bring it up in the first place? Because these people are so used to being blindly believed no matter what insane things they say, that once they get out in the real world where people just don't take them at their word, they don't really know what to do with themselves. What? You're challenging my claims? Yes, I am. Then they don't know what to do because they don't have anything else. It's what leads into impotent threats and then the ultimate retreat into the hills, because they've just made a complete fool of themselves by saying things they can't back up in any way, shape, or form. This kind of thing is really predictable, and I'll lay it out for theists. Here's what you're going to do, and invariably, that's exactly what happens, because I've seen it so many times. It's really, really sad just how often this kind of stuff goes on, but it still does.
And then understand everything else in light of God. So, for example, we think about the second most important mystery in Christianity, the Incarnation, in light of the Trinity, because the mystery of the Trinity is made known in and through the Incarnation. Who God is in himself is revealed to us because God became human.
Says who? Because at this point, he's just throwing out random words that he hopes will resonate with the already religiously gullible. This is one more reason that they really don't want to talk to us, because we don't automatically buy into their theological bullshit without question. We don't let these empty claims fly by without challenge, and they don't have anything intelligent to say in response to our challenges. They just really want to believe, and wanting to believe means absolutely nothing at all.
And that dynamic is also at work in the other doctrines of the faith. If you study in a theological way, scientifically you could say, the sacraments or the Blessed Virgin Mary or the grace of Jesus Christ.
See? There he's just proving that he doesn't actually understand what science is. Just because you say the words, that doesn't mean you're doing the thing. The thing is diametrically opposed to what you're saying, but you're just too clueless to have any idea where exactly you're going wrong. The moment you introduce faith, you're no longer doing science, if you ever were. Faith and fact are two entirely different things. Faith only gets used where there is no fact to be found. Until you can entirely excise this religious faith from your cognitive processes, you're not doing science at all. You're just making a fool of yourself.
These all somehow manifest the revelation of God, who God is, as Trinity, and are understood rightly in the light of God. Even with divine revelation, we cannot perfectly comprehend in an inclusive, total way who God is, especially in this life. But faith is a real form of knowing God, and it's not the same thing as the vision of God or an immediate intellectual perception of God, but it gives us light and knowledge into who God is.
How? I mean, that was just a bunch of religious bullshit that has absolutely no demonstrable rational backing whatsoever. How does any of that work? This is just, we really want to know, without having any demonstrable basis for attaining said knowledge. The simple fact is, it doesn't matter what you want. It only matters what's actually so, and the only way to determine what is actually so, or most likely actually so, is to find evidence that it's actually so. Why don't you get on that? Because faith doesn't get you anywhere. Faith doesn't mean anything. Faith is the excuse that the terminally gullible give themselves to believe something for which they have no evidence whatsoever. That describes the religious to a T, right? They have nothing of substance to present, tons of misplaced confidence in their imaginations, and wishful thinking, and a desire to talk themselves into thinking that they were right all along. Okay, well, prove it. But they can't, and they'd rather hide in their religious channels, talking to other idiots, rather than admit their own failures. And that's kind of sad, huh?
So faith provides us with a kind of ultimate perspective on life, both through theology and through the spiritual life and mysticism, which don't compete with one another, but complement one another. But in this sense, faith gives rise to a science open to mystery. so that theology is pointing us towards something beyond theology in our own spiritual life. It's pointing us towards union with God.
I'm not even going to say it. I mean, I've said prove it enough, and we all know that we'll get nothing of substance in return. It's only, but I like it. Yeah, but fuck you and your fee-fees. That's not how rational people operate. And these people, not only are they not rational, they're certainly not scientific, they're just overly emotional children with delusions of grandeur who just want to believe. Well, too bad. Now, I don't really care if they pretend to be doing science. They're just not. Science isn't some kind of holy writ. It's a methodology, and you're either operating in accordance with that methodology or you're not, and they're not even remotely close. You don't get to pretend you're a scientist when you're ignoring the entire core of what science is and what science does, but we all know that the religious, they're not known for being overly honest, right? They're just looking for validation for their overly emotional, childish, entirely irrational beliefs. They just want it to be true. But that doesn't mean that it is. More and more often these days, it seems, they're realizing that they're just not as credible as they think they are, so they try to steal from the actual credible disciplines by entirely misunderstanding or, let's be honest, just lying about those disciplines to try to lend them an air of respectability. It doesn't work, except for those who aren't that smart to begin with. If you want to do science, then do science. But first, you have to understand what science is. Science isn't just whatever you want it to be. That might work for religion, but it doesn't work for science. I doubt Father White here actually gives a damn because, as always, he's just preaching to the choir and telling them what they want to hear. Truth doesn't actually matter. Because it doesn't matter what you want to hear. It only matters what's actually demonstrably true, and religion is about as far from that as you can get. Too bad they will never get that through their heads. Because I think we all have to admit, they're not using them for anything coherent.
Bum